The Zorth Dominion hadn't lost a war in 500 years. They were the kind of empire that swallowed planets before breakfast and signed treaties over lunch with civilizations too broken to resist. Their warfleet spanned half the galaxy, their technology was the stuff of legend. So when Earth appeared on the Dominion's expansion charts, it was stamped with one word in the conquest ledger: routine. Admiral Trescall almost laughed when he saw the mission orders. A small, blue-green planet orbiting a dull yellow star, tucked away in a quiet spiral arm. No known alliances. No advanced defenses. Primitive industry. Barely spacefaring. He told his staff it would be a training exercise for their new officers, a chance to let them feel the thrill of an easy victory. The Dominion fleet dropped into high orbit over Earth on a quiet Tuesday. 200 warships, each capable of vaporizing continents, blotted out the stars. Their arrival was supposed to terrify the locals into surrender. It didn't. There was no panicked broadcast from the planet. No scrambled fighter jets or desperate diplomats begging for mercy. Instead, silence. Strange, Trescall muttered, pacing the bridge of his flagship. Patch into their communication network. The Dominion's comms team tried, but every signal they sent came back warped, fragmented into nonsense. Earth's satellites transmitted garbled static, as if mocking their attempts. The humans weren't jamming them in the usual way, they were scrambling the data at a fundamental level. By hour 6, targeting sensors began to fail. The fleet's weapons registered phantom targets, sometimes thousands of them, blinking in and out of existence. Scouts sent to investigate reported no enemy ships, yet their instruments claimed the void was swarming with craft. By hour 12, the first ship vanished. The Vraxel Spear, a cruiser holding position over the Pacific, simply stopped transmitting. No distress signal. No explosion. Visual feed from nearby ships showed it drifting, and then being swallowed by darkness, as if space itself folded over it. The feed cut. No debris was found. Trescall blamed a malfunction and pressed on. But as the hours ticked by, more ships disappeared, always silently, always without warning. On the surface, the humans made no obvious counterattack. Instead, strange electromagnetic pulses began to ripple through the atmosphere. They rose like ghostly auroras, crawling across the sky in shimmering colors that Dominion science couldn't explain. These pulses wormed their way into shipboard systems, corrupting navigation, freezing weapon arrays, and most disturbingly rewriting the fleet's AI command code. By hour 24, the Dominion had lost a quarter of its fleet to unknown causes. The surviving ships were no longer in sync. Formation broke down. Supply shuttles lost their way between carriers. The Admiral's orders took minutes to reach their recipients, sometimes hours, and when they arrived, the wording had changed, as if some invisible hand was editing the commands mid-transmission. It wasn't war as Trescall understood it. There were no grand space battles, no exchange of fire. It felt like the humans were playing with them. At hour 36, morale collapsed. Crew members reported hearing voices through their comm implants, voices speaking perfect Zorth, whispering their personal fears back to them. Some claimed to see shapes moving just outside their viewports, angular, predatory silhouettes darting between shadows. The Admiral ordered a full retreat from low orbit to regroup. The fleet rose higher, but ships in the rear of the formation veered off course, as if yanked by unseen gravity wells. Long-range sensors showed they weren't heading into open space at all, they were looping back toward Earth. "Admiral," said his second-in-command, pale with fear, "we're being herded." The truth hit Trescall like cold steel. The humans weren't fighting them in space. They had turned space itself into a weapon. Whatever Earth was hiding, stealth platforms, orbital traps, gravity manipulation, it was far beyond the primitive status the Dominion had believed. By hour 42, only half the original fleet remained in functional order. And still, Earth had not fired a single visible shot. On the bridge, the air was thick with dread. Trescall stared at the blue planet filling his viewport. Something in those swirling white clouds seemed aware. Watching. He opened a private channel to his senior officers. "This is no longer a conquest," he said flatly. "It is a survival operation. Prepare to disengage." No one argued. At hour 48, the Dominion fleet jumped to FTL. No formation, no discipline, just desperate flight. The survivors didn't look back, afraid of what they might see trailing them in the dark. Weeks later, in a classified meeting, Trescall presented his final report to the Dominion Council. He did not mention pride. He did not mention victory. He simply ended with this line: "If any future Dominion vessel approaches Earth, it will not return." The Council voted unanimously to erase Earth's coordinates from every star chart. And across the galaxy, in the shadowy corners where rumors are traded like contraband, one warning began to circulate. If you want to lose an assault in 48 hours, make Earth your mark. The Velrun Syndicate was a name feared in every smuggler's port, every black market hub, and every planet that had ever failed to pay tribute. They were not a government, they were an empire of crime, bound together by greed and violence. When the Syndicate's warlords set their sights on Earth, the decision was almost casual, a simple business move. A quiet, blue world with scattered cities, minimal orbital defenses, and no fleet to speak of? It was the perfect target. The invasion fleet arrived on a silent burn, cutting through the void like steel knives. Sleek raiders, heavy assault frigates, and a handful of dreadnoughts emerged from FTL in the outer system. The plan was to descend on the planet fast, smash its communications, then carve it up for resources and slaves. For the first hour, everything went as expected. Earth's satellites were destroyed or hijacked. The Syndicate broadcast a single message across all bands: "This world now belongs to the Velrun Syndicate. Kneel, or burn." But there was no reply. When the first landing parties touched down in major cities, New York, London, Beijing, Sao Paulo, they found streets eerily empty. Not evacuated, just abandoned. Stores stood open, lights still glowing in apartments, meals half finished on tables. "This is wrong," murmured Captain Salvek, leader of the New York landing team. "This is bait." Then the attacks began. From the rooftops, from the alleys, from the sewers, fire erupted. Not primitive bullets, but railgun slugs from weapons so compact they could be fired from the shoulder. Syndicate troops fell in droves as invisible snipers shredded their ranks. Those who survived scrambled for cover, only to find their positions collapsing under pinpoint artillery fire. Some of the civilians they encountered weren't civilians at all, they were heavily armed militia with military training and strange prototype gear. One squad was wiped out by what looked like a single man in tactical armor moving faster than their sensors could track. By hour 8, the Syndicate's commanders realized that the cities themselves were traps. Entire districts had been rigged to detonate, bridges collapsing on command, skyscrapers toppling into streets to block armored columns, underground tunnels flooding without warning. From orbit, Velrun assault frigates tried to provide fire support, but their targeting systems malfunctioned. Images from surface drones showed the enemy where they weren't supposed to be, creating chaos and friendly fire incidents. At hour 12, a squad of Syndicate shock troops tried to breach a fortified position in central London. As they pushed forward, a flock of birds passed overhead, except these birds weren't alive. They were small, camouflaged drones that dove into the troops, exploding in bursts of shrapnel. The Syndicate began to adapt, but Earth adapted faster. By hour 24, the fleet had failed to establish a single permanent landing zone. Supplies were running low. Communication with ground forces was patchy at best. And then the ocean awoke. Deep beneath the waves, something stirred. Massive sonar contacts moved toward Syndicate ships in low orbit. At first, the warlords assumed they were nuclear submarines, primitive but dangerous. They were wrong. At hour 32, the first of Earth's ocean platforms broke the surface. They were enormous, floating fortresses bristling with railguns, missile silos, and strange electromagnetic cannons that lit up the night sky. The platforms fired in perfect coordination, their salvos tearing through Velrun shields and armor as if they were paper. The Kryvan's Fawn, a Syndicate dreadnought, was split clean in half by a single tungsten slug traveling at hypersonic speed. Another warship's core went critical after a beam of concentrated plasma lanced through its reactor bay. The ocean platforms weren't alone. Sleek submersibles the size of frigates emerged like sharks, launching torpedoes that accelerated beyond any known physics model. Entire Syndicate escort squadrons vanished beneath walls of water and fire. By hour 40, panic had set in. The Velrun fleet began to break formation, commanders shouting over each other in the comm channels. Some ships tried to retreat, but those that did were hunted by orbital railguns hidden on the moon. Their shots were rare, but everyone was fatal. On the ground, Syndicate soldiers were being systematically routed. Guerrilla fighters struck with uncanny precision, hitting supply lines, sniping officers, and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Every engagement felt like the humans had already predicted the Syndicate's next move. By hour 44, command authority had disintegrated. Syndicate ships stopped responding to central orders. Smaller captains prioritized their own survival over the mission, retreating without clearance. At hour 48, the Velrun Syndicate invasion of Earth officially ended. There was no negotiated ceasefire, no surrender ceremony, just a desperate, disorganized jump to FTL. The warlords met in secret a month later. Footage of the failed assault was purged from their archives. Earth was declared a cursed world. All further expeditions were banned under penalty of death. Yet the soldiers who survived told stories, whispers traded in the dark corners of spaceports. They said Earth was no defenseless backwater. It was a world with teeth hidden deep, waiting for anyone foolish enough to bite. And those teeth, once bared, never let go. The Cthar hierarchy had built its power on speed. Their doctrine was simple: strike fast, overwhelm the target, crush resistance in under 48 hours. If a war dragged on longer, they abandoned it not out of mercy, but because their military machine thrived on momentum, not attrition. It was a system that had conquered 100 worlds. And when their scouts discovered Earth, a lush, blue-green sphere in a quiet corner of the galaxy, it seemed like the perfect target. The initial scans were almost insulting. Sparse orbital presence. No visible planetary shields. A few crude satellites. Industrial output was modest. Population scattered in cities separated by vast oceans. No central planetary government to coordinate a unified defense. In the eyes of the hierarchy's supreme commander, it was exactly the kind of soft target their doctrine was made for. The fleet arrived on schedule, slipping into orbit under the cover of Earth's night side. Within minutes, global communications were targeted with precision strikes. Under normal circumstances, this would have paralyzed any planet. But Earth didn't respond normally. Instead of chaos, strange bursts of code began flooding the hierarchy's systems. At first, they looked like static until it began rewriting shipboard software. Displays flickered, commands were altered, and sensor arrays began reporting impossible readings. By hour 6, the fleet was still operational, but something was wrong. Warships were firing on each other, convinced they were under attack from enemy craft that didn't exist. Orders from the flagship arrived garbled, sometimes inverted entirely. Ground assault coordination collapsed before the first dropships even landed. Still, the Cthar pushed forward. Invasion craft descended into the atmosphere, expecting to secure major cities. They met resistance, but not from any standing army. By hour 12, landing parties reported weather patterns behaving unnaturally. Storms rose from clear skies in minutes. Lightning struck dropships with uncanny precision. Entire platoons were trapped in sudden floods or buried by localized blizzards. Satellite data confirmed that the weather systems weren't random, they were being controlled. The ground itself was hostile. In some cities, roadways erupted into fire as if the asphalt had been mined with explosives. In others, towering skyscrapers collapsed in timed demolitions, blocking armored advances. And everywhere, human forces moved like shadows, striking hard, vanishing before counterattacks could land. By hour 18, hierarchy commanders realized their powered armor wasn't working properly. EMP bursts cut through their shielding, frying circuits. Some units found their weapons disabled entirely, replaced on their HUDs with mocking human phrases, "Better luck next time." The humans weren't fighting for territory, they were fighting for humiliation. Hour 30 arrived with disaster. The hierarchy's main orbital carrier, the Varex Pride, detected a massive object incoming from lunar orbit. At first, the AI dismissed it as debris until it hit. A tungsten rod, the size of a bus, moving at 12 kilometers per second, punched through the carrier's shield and armor in a single heartbeat. The impact turned the entire warship into a cloud of molten metal and shattered bodies. Moments later, 3 more kinetic strikes followed, each targeting high-value ships in perfect sequence. The fleet was bleeding faster than they could regroup. Ground operations deteriorated even further. Human militias seemed to anticipate every move. Ambushes occurred at exactly the right intersections, supply drops were intercepted within minutes, and high-ranking officers were sniped before they could even issue orders. It was as if the humans had access to the hierarchy's own battle plans, which, in truth, they probably did. By hour 36, the surviving fleet attempted to pull back to higher orbit, but navigation was compromised. Some ships jumped in the wrong direction entirely, appearing hundreds of kilometers closer to Earth instead of farther away. The hierarchy's supreme commander, a veteran of a dozen blitzkrieg victories, finally understood the truth: this planet wasn't disorganized. It was bait. Earth had played weak for decades, letting the galaxy think it was backward and harmless. But beneath that facade was a war machine unlike anything the hierarchy had faced, one that didn't fight head-on, but dismantled enemies from the inside out. At hour 42, the Supreme Commander gave the order to retreat. But even that wasn't simple. FTL drives were plagued by phantom errors. A few ships that managed to jump found themselves pulled back into real space, as if Earth's gravity had suddenly reached out and refused to let go. The final hours were chaos. Human fighters harried retreating ships with precision strikes. Railgun slugs from hidden orbital platforms shredded anything slow enough to be caught. In some sectors, the void itself seemed to twist, scattering ships into blind jumps they might never return from. At exactly the 48th hour, the surviving Kthar vessels broke free and limped away, trailing smoke and debris. No human leader came forward to demand terms. No fleet followed to finish them off. Earth didn't need to gloat. The Supreme Commander returned to the hierarchy's capital in disgrace. His after-action report was classified, but one line was whispered in every military hall. Earth is not a target. Earth is a trap. And so the Kthar doctrine remained unchanged except for one rule, added in red ink to every strategic manual. Never assault Earth. Not even for 48 hours.